So I'm in Home Depot looking at the storage bins, and I'm not the only one that was there. And that was fine because other people were organizing their lives too. But there was these two guys who were just like hovering, like around me. And I'm like, I must be standing where they want to be, but there's other, they could wander away. And one guy eventually, I'm not taking forever. I mean, it takes a minute to get this. And this one guy just kept hovering, and it was driving me crazy. And my old self would have said something snarky to him. But I'm like, no, there's no point in saying something snarky. I'm just going to get my stuff, and then I'll move out of his way. And the guy just kept getting closer and closer and closer. I'm like, I'm working as fast as I possibly can, and I'm getting closer and closer to snarkiness. And finally, he looks at me, and he goes, excuse me? And I'm like, yes. He's like, one of your bins is broken, and I just wanted you to know that before you went home. And I was like, I am so glad I didn't say anything snarky to you, because you were just trying to be kind. And it made me realize how much I have grown in some areas. And I thought, that's a good thing. And as I go back, I can think of all sorts of ways that I have grown. Last week, one of my, a guy that I have known since I was 11 came to church, and I got to visit with him for a little while. And I was thinking about how much of a different person I am from the person I was when I was 11. I grew, I matured, I changed, and that is a good thing. I mean, what if we never grew or we never changed? I mean, we know people who are like that, who don't grow, and we don't think of it positively. I mean, whether it's a manager or an employer or a friend or a family member, we look at them and we shake our heads and we go, they'll never change. And we feel like that's sad, because when we stop growing, we start dying. And Jesus is all about bringing us life and not death. And so we're going to look at growing this morning and how key that is, not to just being a person, but how key that is to following Jesus. And I want us to look at 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18. I'm going to read it out of the English Standard Version just because I liked that better. And we all, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being changed into his likeness, from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. It was said of a certain people group in the world that they never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. I'll let you think about that for a minute. We have an opportunity, and we can miss it. And every once in a while, I see people who come to a real, maybe turning point in their lives. And I'm praying for them and hoping for them. And I'm in their corner that they'll make a right choice and they'll grow and they'll change. And they don't always do it. Sometimes they miss it. And I just find that so painful. Like you were so close to breaking free, to getting out, and you missed the opportunity. Now, some of us, honestly, are okay with mediocrity. Some of us are okay with just getting by. Some of us are okay with just doing the bare minimum. But others of us want more. And I think Jesus wants more for us than that. And so we have chances to evaluate our lives and to decide to make some changes or to grow in some areas. And there are natural starting points that come around. And this is one of them. So it's the beginning of January, and people all over the country and all over the world are making New Year's resolutions. And that's a good thing. I mean, we make fun of them because we know they don't last. But it's a good opportunity to take advantage of that. So lots of people are making good choices, at least to begin with. Maybe it's to drink less or to eat better or to exercise more. You know, my challenge to you is keep the gym membership going till at least February before you stop. But as Jesus followers, we have another opportunity for change and growth. And I'm going to frame it like this. What does God want for you? And note that I said, what does God want for you, not what does God want from you? Because lots of times that's how we frame the question. What does God want from me? But I think the way to look at the question is, as we come into the new year, what does God want for you? So I want you to just think about that for a second. As you look at the next 12 months laid before you, what does God want for you? What does God hope for you? What would God's plans, what would God's desires be for you? I ran across a quote by John Stott, and he said this: God wants his people to become like Christ. Christ-likeness is the will of God for the people of God. I think he's got it right. The thing that God wants for you, for me, for us in the coming year is that we will become more like Jesus. That's God's will. And it reminds me that as followers of Jesus, we are on a journey. We started at a place, and we are going someplace. Jesus is leading us on. It's a path of growth. It's a path of change. We often say that we want people to come however they are. You know, wherever you are on your journey, however Jesus calls you, wherever you are at the point that you come here, we want you to come and be comfortable however you are. But we don't want you to stay that way. We want you to grow and become more like Jesus. That's why our second organizing principle is that we are developing disciples who make disciples. And so as we grow, as we mature, as we go on this journey, as we follow Jesus, we're being changed into his likeness. And why does God want us to become like Jesus? I think it's because that's where we find joy. Becoming like Jesus is where we find the source of fulfillment. Becoming like Jesus is where we find the source of hope. And if those are the types of things that Jesus produces in our lives, when we think about God wanting something for or from us or wanting us to be like Jesus, why does it give us pause for thought? When we think about what God may want to do in our lives, what are we afraid of? Well, I came up with three things. The first thing that I think that we're afraid of when we evaluate what God might be wanting to do in our lives is that he'll make us do stuff that we don't want to do. Now, we all have this list in our heads. Sometimes we articulate it, sometimes we don't. We have this list in our heads of what we think will make us happy, what we think will bring us fulfillment, what we think will make us be the people that we want to be. Now, I know a lot of incredibly successful people. No matter how you want to organize that, I know a lot of people who've been very, very successful. They got the job, they got the salary, they got the perks, they got the stress, they got the pressure to do immoral or illegal things. They got in there at a level where they got to see how the sausage was made. And it wasn't pretty, and it didn't bring them the satisfaction that they wanted. And what's interesting to me is all the things that are on our list are all neutral stuff. It's neither good nor bad. It becomes bad when we give it enormous power over us because we think if we just get, if we just possess, if we just are this thing, name it, that will change our lives and it will make us ultimately happy. But they don't. And yet we keep trying. And advertisers know this. It was said that Albert Einstein said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. I think insanity is examining all the evidence and refusing to believe it. Because we know from our own experience, money doesn't make us happy. We know from experience, collecting houses doesn't make us happy. We know from experience, the corner office will not make you happy. And yet we keep choosing to follow those things anyway and expecting them to bring the satisfaction that our souls long for. But until we figure out that only Jesus will satisfy the longing of our soul, we'll keep doing this hybrid thing where we give Jesus a slice of the pie and keep chasing after everything else with the rest of the pie and then being dumbfounded at the fact we don't feel joyful or hopeful or fulfilled. We're afraid of what God might want to do in our lives, and yet God only wants good for us. I think one of the reasons it gives us pause for thought when we think about what Jesus might want to do in our lives is it's uncomfortable. Because it requires us to take an honest assessment of who we are and where we are and where we want to be or where we could be or things that might need to change. And most of us don't really like to think about our deficits. Most of us don't really like to think about our growth areas. Most of us don't like to think about how we could change to be better. Many of us are married, and so those are presented to us, but we don't always want to think about them. I thought that was funny. That was funny in my head. Wait, today's not time change Sunday, is it? Okay. And this is on, right? Okay. I've said at least 3 things that I thought were funny that just absolutely nowhere. I got one more good joke coming. I'm just going to let you know ahead of time. Apparently, we're still on our Christmas hangover. And the last thing is that it's too much work. If we want to change, we have to put in the effort to change. And that takes work. But if we don't, then we have to live with whatever complaint or whatever malaise that we currently have. And here's the thing. If you decide not to grow, and if you just decide to live with whatever that thing is that's an irritation in your life, your friends want you to know they get tired of you complaining about it. If you're not going to do anything about it, then at least quit complaining to your friends about it. It's a choice that you make. We're afraid of what God is going to want to do to us. We're afraid it will be uncomfortable. We're afraid it's going to be too much work. But I have found the most joy happens in my life when I follow Jesus closely. Sometimes we just want Jesus to baptize the choices that we've already made. But when we do that, things never change because we're following who we want Jesus to be and not necessarily who Jesus is. When I put aside what I think is going to be fulfilling, when I put aside what I think will make me happy, what I put aside when I think will make my life feel significant, and trust that the Jesus way will truly give me those things, that's when I find those things. That's when I find joy and hope and peace and satisfaction. In this passage in 2 Corinthians, Paul, it's just one part of a very lengthy passage where Paul is actually contrasting the law of Moses with grace and Jesus. And one of the reasons that Paul is bringing this up is because he wants us to understand that following Jesus isn't just about a set of rules. It's not just about a bunch of lists of things that we're supposed to do. Following Jesus is about becoming more like Jesus. And I think that we have this wonderful opportunity to reclaim Christianity because Paul is emphasizing that it's about life change. It's about becoming gracious. It's about becoming loving. It's about becoming just. It's not about a list of things that you vote for or a list of things that you don't do or a list of things that you disapprove of in other people's lives. He spends this whole time talking about how the grace and the love of Jesus totally trumps just rule keeping. So if that's what God wants for us, how do we get changed into the likeness of Jesus? Well, it's in the passage. First of all, it's beholding. He talks about we behold the glory of God because it's exposure to God that changes us. Every parent knows that your children will become like the friends that they have. And sometimes that strikes terror into your heart, depending on the type of friends that your children have. We become like the people that we hang around with. It is absolutely axiomatic. A number of years ago, Allie went to, it was some dance, I don't think it was the prom, and we went over to the house of some people who live in a very, very different socioeconomic bracket than we do. And we knew most of them, but we didn't hang around with them. And we're standing out on their beach, and we're taking pictures out there, and it's glorious. And there's probably 10 other couples, and the topic of conversation, because it's sort of separated into the couples, the moms that were taking pictures, and the dads that were standing off to one side. And the conversation among the dads was how big their boat was. And everybody talked about how big their boat was. Somebody talked about how well, that's a nice size for, I guess, what you use it for. But ours is actually, 2 feet longer than that. And I'm like, okay. And like the priority here was look at our kids. Isn't this wonderful? The priority was, my boat is bigger than your boat. Because if my boat is bigger, therefore I am better. I was contrasting that with one of my favorite things that I get to do every year or every couple of years, and that's I get to go to the chair affair at the Northwest Furniture Bank. And if you go to the chair affair at the Northwest Furniture Bank, you go for one reason. Well, food now, because it got much better. But the reason that you go to the chair affair is to give money, because you know that's what you're there for. And it is so much fun to watch people play and outgive each other. You know, there will always end up being a bidding war between a couple of people, and it's fun because they're there to give money. And that peer pressure becomes very, very positive. You know, as you can see, the wheels turn in people's heads. Well, I was only planning on spending this, but gosh, everybody else is giving that. Okay, I'll jump in on that bandwagon too, you know? And so peer pressure changes us. We get changed by the people we hang around. The more we hang out with Jesus, the more we get changed to be like Jesus. So it has to be beholding. And then it happens by the Spirit. And this is good news because Paul writes elsewhere that God says that it's not by might, not by power, not by our willpower, not by the decisions that we make, but it's ultimately by the Spirit of God that we are changed into looking like Jesus. But it's a partnership. We work together with the Spirit, but it's the Spirit who makes us into being more like Jesus. And it happens degree by degree by degree. Sometimes I think we sabotage our own growth because we have these great delusions of grandeur. You know, I have never prayed in my life, but I'm going to become like a monk and give 4 hours of prayer every morning at 2 o'clock. That ain't going to happen. You know? And so we never pray. I was reading this, I've done it a number of times, and I talked to Ron Talcott, who was a pilot for a long time with the Air Force and with Boeing, because I'd heard this story about how much of a difference 1 degree can make. So if you are in New York and you're coming to Seattle, and you get on the plane, and the pilot is 1 degree off, you'll never be able to tell for the first little while. But there's this magic rule. It's 60 to 1. And that is, every 60 miles you go forward, if you are 1 degree off, you will be 1 mile off of your target. Which means that if you travel from New York to Seattle and you are 1 degree off, instead of landing in Seattle, you will land in Chehalis. 1 degree makes an enormous amount of difference. It also makes an enormous amount of difference in a positive way. Maybe you can't pray for 4 hours a day. What if you started with 5 minutes? It doesn't sound like much. It's only 1 degree. But if you take that 1 degree 2, 4, 6, 10, 12 days down the road, it's going to grow. We change from degree to degree. And I think it's important to work in manageable amounts. So there's 2 areas that I think that we need to consider when we think about the opportunity to become more like Jesus. And the first is, who am I? I think there are 2 main ways that Jesus wants to work in our lives. And the first is this question, who am I? This is to deal with what is your major calling in life? What is your major purpose in life? What are you called to be in life? And you can answer this in so many ways. And maybe something has already popped into your head about, when I think of myself, this is how I picture myself. I am this, fill in the blank. Biblically, who you are is a bearer of the image of God. That's first and foremost. Who you are someone who bears the image of God. Secondly, Brendan read a passage earlier that talks about how we are ambassadors for Christ. That's the second biblical image that I want to give you. Your major calling is to bear the image of God in all of your relationships, in everything that you do, and to be an ambassador for Christ everywhere that you go. So if you're supposed to be an ambassador for Christ, does that mean that you should quit your job and go to the mission field? On behalf of every missionary everywhere, let me say emphatically, no, please don't. Unless you're really called, in which case, test that thing out. It doesn't mean that you need to quit your job because God may have put you where you already are. Does that mean that you need to become weird and carry a King James Bible and speak in Elizabethan English? For every Christian everywhere, let me emphatically say, no, please don't become weird. What it does mean is that you live your life differently. To be an ambassador for Christ means that you care about people. It means that you do the right thing. It It means that you take the high road. It means that you don't demean other people. It means that you change how you view yourself. So you're a high school student, say. You have a job. Your job is to enjoy being a teenager because it ain't going to last very long. Your job is to get good grades. Your job is to become a well-rounded person. Your job is to prepare for what's next. But your primary role as a high school student is to live your life in such a way that the other students at the school see Jesus in you. It's to say to yourself, I'm going out on the football field this afternoon, and I'm going to bring glory and honor to Jesus. So you're a retiree. What an opportunity that you have to bring light and hope and joy to people that you have coffee with. What an opportunity you have to donate your time to be around other people. What an opportunity that you have to be the non-curmudgeon in the crowd. There are so many ways that you can be Jesus in those situations. So you're a stay-at-home mom, or you go to the office or the shop, you're an electrician or a teacher. The way that you have to view that is everything I do or say today will be designed to honor God. I'll bring joy, I'll bring encouragement, I'll bring care for other people everywhere I go. And if I get a chance, if someone asks me why I stand out, I'll be happy to tell them. Because first and foremost, I'm a teacher, a mechanic, a nurse, a grandma for Jesus. So the first question is to figure out, who are you? The second question, I think, is to ask, what is God calling me to do? And you might have several callings all at the same time. The first calling is, who are you? And how do you embody Jesus wherever you go? The second is the specific things of what God might be calling you to do at this point in your life. And there might be a number of things that God is calling you to do. How do you discern that? Because you can do anything, but you can't do everything. So as you try to discern what God has for you as you move out into this new year, at whatever life stage you are, what do you think God is calling you to do? Maybe ask yourself a couple of clarifying questions. What do you want the people who are most important to you to say about you? I mean, you can't care what everybody thinks about you, but you should care about what some people think about you. What do you want them to think about you when they think about you? What makes you feel good when people say something about you? A couple of weeks ago, somebody said to me, "You always take the high road." And I was like, oh, I think I'll walk off the field now. I'm like, okay, my calling is to take the high road. That's perfectly good. What's the opportunity in front of you? I think sometimes, again, delusions of grandeur, I'm going to change the world, and God has something right in front of you. Years ago, this happened when we were in New York, but it's such a great story. There was a woman in our congregation who was 85, 88, somewhere in there. I mean, what do fractions matter at that point? 85 years old or so, and she was in skilled nursing. And she shared a room with a woman from Eastern Europe who spoke no English, who was the same age. The woman from our church learned to speak the other language so that she could have a conversation with her. Now, did she become fluent? No, but she didn't need to. All she needed was a couple of words to be able to engage in a conversation. That was what God was calling her to do at that point. So if you're thinking about what is God calling you to do, then go back and think through the passage. Beholding, as you discern the will of God, what is revealed to you about who you are and what God is calling you to do through prayer, through scripture study, through mentoring? By the Spirit, how do you feel nudged by God at this point in your life? Or by degree? What's one step that you could take to try something out that might help you discern what God is calling you to do this year? So next week, we're going to be talking more about these things. We're talking more about the steps that we can take as we look at discipleship and growth. But consider some of the things over this next week. Pray about some of the financial stuff we're offering. Pray about your small group involvement. Pray about serving opportunities. Pray about mentoring. And we'll talk more about that in the coming weeks. But let me leave you with 3 questions. Number 1, what's an example of how you are becoming more like Jesus? Number 2, what choices do you need to make to bring your actions into line with God's plans and purposes for your life. And number 3, what is your chief growth area for 2025?
Hi, thanks for watching. The people of Harbor Covenant Church really want you to know the love that God has for you, want to grow with you in faith, and want to serve alongside you, not only to help others do the same, but also to make our families and our communities better. If that sounds like something that you can get on board with, then like, follow, and drop us a comment in the video. Watch some more videos on our channel or come visit us on Sunday. You can find out more about Harbor Covenant Church at harborcov.church.